We put out the call for questions, and you guys responded loud and clear that you want to hear about draft trades. So let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, you guys get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. What is up, friends? This is Jake Arthur from HorseshoeHuddle.com. Just me today. Zach will be back with us tomorrow. And out on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, we put out the bat signal, I guess, for questions from you guys. A couple weeks left until the draft. So what are you guys wanting to know? And we actually got so many questions that we're going to split this up into today's show and tomorrow. So I saved the good ones that I really want Zach to answer with me for tomorrow. But these ones are really good as well. But I know that, dude. I know I was brain ticks, and I think tomorrow's show will be really good because we want to pick his brain about a couple of these things. So I kind of categorized all these things up. A lot of questions about trading up or back in the draft. So we'll have a whole segment dedicated to that. There's also ones on, again, with the draft, specific selections or positions and what we think of their placement in certain rounds. And then we're going to finish things up talking specifically about the current Colts and what things may look like this season. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick things off. This was from @Tenanners, again on Twitter. Do the Colts trade up with the Bears for Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors, which I presume will be pick number 9? They have 2 picks in the top 10. Colts aren't going up to 1. Stick at 15 for best player available or trade back. So if I'm going to rank these scenarios in terms of what's most likely, first I'm going to say it's most likely that they trade back, only because this is a pretty good draft in some areas they need. There's going to be a handful of corners that really suit them. There's a handful of receivers as well. You could even look at like edge rushers. But regardless, I think there's going to be a hunk of players there that they really like. Let's say there's 6 or 7 guys on the board that they really like when they're sitting there at 15. Well, they'll move back a little bit, or could move back a little bit in order to acquire more picks and still not be moving back too far to where they're going to miss out on all those guys. So that's usually something that they really like to do. The caveat, of course, would be if there's someone there, one of their like blue chip players that falls in their lap, and trading back would jeopardize them getting them. I don't think they would trade back in that instance. So I would say trade back, stay at 15 for best player available. Again, because there's going to be someone there, whether it's Brock Bowers, Quinion Mitchell, maybe not all of Dallas Turner. Those guys could all be off the board, but like there will be someone there that they really like. But the question is, do they like them so much that they don't want to risk moving back? And then trading up, of course. I don't think it's highly unlikely, but I don't think it's as unlikely as the other scenarios. Which leads us into our next question from @WantMoreColts. With Chris Ballard returning most of the roster from last year, it feels like he believes the addition of Anthony Richardson will put the Colts in playoff contention with the need of instant impact rookies. Do you see a world where they trade up for, again, a Rome Odunze, Brock Bowers, Dallas Turner type of player? So I think you're right with that. The Colts' actions this offseason, and really from Ballard's own mouth, have pointed to the fact that the Colts think they're pretty close. Ballard has said once or twice that they should be competing for the division and playoffs. They knew they were just a win away last year from being in the postseason without Anthony. They really believe Anthony will be a difference maker. pairing him with Jonathan Taylor behind that offensive line that did so well last offseason. I do think the Colts think they're just a couple key pieces away. And because of that, you could see them going big game hunting and saying, okay, so Anthony Richardson being back on his own is great, but what if we traded up and gave him Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors, someone very explosive in the passing game? That makes sense. I just don't think it's as likely because it, of course, involves giving something up. The Colts will be going up to get a terrific player, no doubt. But in recent episodes, Zach and I kind of went over the scenario. Do they want to give up what would probably be a third-round pick as well? Maybe not. It just depends on the player and how much we think they're in love with them. Oddly enough, the Colts are hosting Malik Neighbors today, who seems to be a top 10 lock. But there's been, of course, how there always is at this stage of the draft cycle, some leaks about, off-field concerns, character stuff. That, of course, coming out this time of year always is trying to aid a player moving down the board. So the Colts hosting Neighbors today, maybe doing a little bit of fact-finding, seeing what's up with all this stuff that's out there about you. But it's very interesting nonetheless. Again, the Colts don't often trade up that early in the draft. We see it occasionally in the mid-rounds, 3rd, 4th, 5th round, but it's possible. I know they want to surround Anthony Richardson with as much help as possible, so I'm not gonna shoo that possibility away at all. Last one for this segment from @Ty_Night9. I've been eyeballing the Eagles at pick 22 as a trade-up partner, meaning the Eagles trade up with the Colts to 15. Do you think the value for trading up 7 spots for the Eagles, again, 22 to 15, would the value be Philly's pick 22 and 53, which is a second rounder? And then they also go on to say, also, if we do trade back to 22, do you think they go with Cooper DeJean? So I was looking at the trade value chart for this one. The Colts' 15th pick is worth 1,050 points. The Eagles' 22nd pick is worth 780, which leaves a difference of 270 points. 270 points is equal to the end of the second round. Now, the Eagles do have 2 second-round picks, 50, which is worth 400 points, and 53, which is worth 370. Both of those are worth more. They'd be paying a lot more than what is worth in that instance. But since they do have 2 second-round picks, that may mean, if they want to move up for a player they really covet, they'd be willing to give up one of those. Otherwise, maybe they talk the Colts into, kind of punting there and giving them a second-rounder next season. Teams often do that, figuring they're going to be picking near the bottom of the round. But regardless, I think it makes sense for the Colts to be able to get one of those second-round picks in 2024 out of the Eagles. Otherwise, you could see some combination of like a 3rd and 4th rounder or something. Colts and Eagles are pretty good at working together. So I think working in good faith, the Colts might be able to get one of those second rounders. Now, you mentioned a specific player with Cooper DeJean. Colts moving back from 15 to 22. I think DeJean would definitely be in the mix there. I think he's perfect for the Colts athletically and, versatility-wise, being able to play safety, nickel, or outside corner. He does very well in off-ball situations, zone coverage. The Colts obviously do quite a bit of that, so I think that fits DeJean very well. But that could also be the absolutely perfect spot for like a Xavier Worthy, for example, which it seems like the Colts are probably decently interested. They've had him for one of their official visits. They sent a decent contingent down there to Texas, which they could have been looking at A.D. Mitchell and Jatavian Sanders as well. But looking at the writing on the wall, from what I've observed this offseason, I do think the Colts are pretty interested in Worthy. So that's that for segment 1. Coming up next, again, we'll look at like some specific players and positions that you guys were pretty curious about. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers, you guys get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Okie doke, everyone. So moving on to some more good questions here. First one from @BrodoBaggins. How would you feel going into next year if the Colts go wide receiver / tight end and safety in rounds 1 and 2, and then take either cornerbacks Cam Hart or Kyrie Jackson in round 3? So I do think it's more likely that you swap the last part of that, where it'd be corner in round 2 and safety in round 3, just because that's kind of the value of the position in this draft. I don't think anyone knows where any of these safeties are going to be picked, honestly. Guys like Javon Bullard and Tyler Nubin will probably go on round 2. But otherwise, round 3 seems like the pretty sweet spot there. But regardless, that wasn't your question. So regardless of all of it, I think you could come up with a really good haul in those first 3 rounds. Realistically, you could be looking at a trio compromised of any combination of like wide receiver Brian Thomas or Xavier Worthy from the first round. Either, again, Tyler Nubin or Javon Bullard in rounds 2, which I think they would fit the Colts really well. And then, like you mentioned, Cam Hart or Kyrie Jackson in rounds 3. That would be, again, any combination of those guys, I would be perfectly happy with. I think they would all fit the Colts really well. I think they meet obvious needs. But that early in the draft, meeting needs is great, but like you're also going beyond that with some of these guys like Brian Thomas and Xavier Worthy. I think go well beyond just fulfilling needs. Like I think they're difference makers. Same thing you could say that with Javon Bullard as well. Like he's a really versatile player. He's kind of cut from a similar cloth as like a Kenny Moore when you watch him, but more of home at the safety position rather than corner, although he can come up and play some nickel as well. And then Kyrie Jackson is a big, very lengthy Gus Bradley style of corner. But Cam Hart, when I was at Notre Dame's Pro Day and I was watching Cam Hart doing his field workout, I literally just felt like I was watching Juju Brents out there. So do you want 2 Juju Brentses out on the field at the same time? Because those guys are like 4.5 in their speed. But you hope with their physicality and like ability to mirror guys that it doesn't matter what their long speed is at the end of the day on that. Totally just putting yourself in the team shoes there. But no, again, to answer your question, I think you could come up with an awesome trio of players in that scenario. Up next from @KLP39519, depending on what Chris Ballard does in round 1, do you feel better about the Colts selecting a corner on day 2 or a wide receiver? Meaning, they're going to get a receiver or a corner in the first 3 rounds somewhere. Would you rather wait and get that corner on day 2 or wait and get a receiver on day 2? So I would feel way better about getting a receiver on day 2 because it's just a deeper class. There's definitely corners that I like there in round 2, like Cam Hart. I know the previous question was framed in the 3rd round, but you could get him in the 2nd round as well, and it would be fine. Cam Hart, Max Melton, TJ Tampa. Those are really fine players to get on day 2 corners there. But a receiver, I think you're looking at players who are even a little better, higher quality, and there's a deeper pool of them. Just for example, Ricky Pearsall, Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, Xavier Legette, Troy Franklin, Malachi Corley, and Roman Wilson. You could even throw the Texas guys in there. There's a possibility that either A.D. Mitchell or Xavier Worthy could be there as well. Again, because it's such a deep receiver class. And with the receiver class being as deep as it is, a lot of these guys may not go as early as we think because teams can say, the class is so deep, we can wait a little bit. So you can be looking at like no doubt starting receivers like round 2, round 3. Like it's a very, very deep group. And there's guys that didn't even mention on there. That's just the most likely candidate. So I'd feel way better about waiting for a receiver just because I'm super confident in the quality of player that you're going to get. Last one for this segment from @ocean_sands. Chris Ballard hinted at the Colts knowing which position they will draft in round 1 a long time ago. Is this still considered a wide receiver, or do you think it's a corner? All right, so while I answer this one, I also wanted to just basically put up some examples from the horse's mouth. This is a combination of quotes we have seen from Chris Ballard, both in from the post-season press conference right after the season ended last year, and then at the combine as well. Highlighted in red, I think, are the most telling parts of it. So I think how the Colts will approach things always is going to be with best player available, skewed towards the needs, especially early on in the draft. Like the Colts do tend to address needs pretty early. But if they have evenly ranked players, they're obviously going to lean towards that player at the position they really need. So looking back at the things that Ballard has said since the season ended, I really think it's more likely to be a receiver. Again, just look at this graphic. We talked here about how the Colts really want to surround Anthony Richardson with talent and explosive playmakers. It's been mentioned in 4 different questions here. And that's not even pulling from like things he's done when he's gone on radio shows or anything else, or even Shane Steichen talking about it. Like the Colts want to surround Anthony Richardson with playmakers. They think he is one in his own right, but adding others to play alongside him, that's really what it's all about. So while I do think like sitting at 15, guys like Quinion Mitchell or Dallas Turner, I think they are probably horseshoe guys for the Colts that they do not want to bypass, and they obviously play defense. Outside of guys like that, I really think the Colts would like to make it a goal to get explosive on offense early on in this draft, and that's where you're looking at Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy, Brock Bowers, guys like that. I just think the Colts really want to try and leave the draft with someone like that. But again, they're going to go with best player available. You cannot plan the draft. The draft goes pick by pick, and you just never know how it's going to develop. So while I think that's probably one of their biggest goals going into it, we're just going to have to see how it ultimately works out. So coming up at the end of the show here, we're going to look at kind of current Colts and how things are set up specifically already. And then talk about some certain player scenarios that you guys asked about as well. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or it's your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts that you need at prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, let's send this thing home on a high note. So this first question is from @TyBobOfficial. Pause the draft talk for a minute. How many combined rushing yards do you believe that Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson will have? And a bonus, throw in rushing touchdowns as well. So this is a good question because I think both of these guys are going to be their productivity is going to be different than it was last year. So Jonathan Taylor averaged 74.1 rushing yards per game last season, which was his low, obviously. Just for example, when he blew the roof off of the world in 2021, he averaged like 106 yards per game. So 74.1 yards. I think he's going to be above that, just because, again, that's an outlier. Last year was an outlier, and he was hurt, and it's like the least productive he'd been in a while for playing a good chunk of the season. Anthony Richardson was at 34 rushing yards per game. So, again, I'm going to say Taylor is going to be up, and AR may be a skosh off just because Obviously, he's going to be a little more polished as a passer. You're probably going to want him to protect himself a little more, and he's probably just not going to be as productive as a runner. With that being said, I do put him around 550 rushing yards. That's really not that much when it comes out to an average per game. And Taylor, if you just kick that 74 up to like 80 yards per game, that's over 1,300 rushing yards, or it's about 1,300 rushing yards. So I'll put Richardson at 550 and Taylor at 1,300 rushing yards. So being 1,850 between the two of them. And then touchdowns, I think saying they're going to have 1,850 rushing yards and 20 rushing touchdowns between them, it feels gaudier than I really think it is, because it's not uncommon for Jonathan Taylor to have like 10 or 12 touchdowns. And then I'm not even giving Richardson 10, which I think would be easy for him to hit, because he had like 4 in a very small sample size last year. But I'll say 20. It'll probably be like Taylor with 12 and Richardson with 8 or something. I think these, again, they don't look that eye-popping to me. Like Titans fans would probably accuse me of being a homer or something right now, but I think that's very doable, and it's really not. It's in line with what they've done in their career so far. So that's a good one for you guys to answer as well. AR and JT, what do you think they'll combine to accumulate rushing yards and rushing touchdowns? Go ahead and drop that in the comments there. And then next up, at K Smith 1872, what happens if Alec Pierce surpasses Josh Downs in receiving this year, assuming both are healthy? And he's got multiple questions here. How many times will Ballard trade down in the draft? Who leads the Colts in sacks this year? At the end of the season, who wins comeback player of the year for the Colts? So we'll start with the first one. What happens if Alec Pierce surpasses Josh Downs in receiving yards this year? I do think that would be a little surprising, only because Richardson should be back healthy. Downs should be back healthy. I don't want to say Downs hit like a rookie wall, but he was dealing with a knee injury for the back half of the season that affected him, obviously. So that pair together, we saw, and again, in a small sample size, they work really well together. And Richardson is willing to look downfield to Downs. They just have really good chemistry, and you have to have that when you're doing as many like option routes and things as Josh Downs does. So it would be surprising, but Zach and I have also said we do expect Alec Pierce to be more productive than he has been, just because I think Richardson will look for him downfield more often than Gardner Minshew ever did. But still, I don't want to call Pierce a one-trick pony either, but like he is kind of a niche player. He's not a well-rounded receiver yet. He's a good blocker, and he is a good downfield threat. So Downs does a little more. So I would be surprised if Pierce gets more receiving yards, especially if you consider the Colts draft a receiver early on. They're probably going to eat into Alec Pierce's playing time a little bit. Next question, how many times will Chris Ballard trade down in the draft? And that, I will quote Lindsay Lohan from Mean Girls, and I'm probably going to get this slightly wrong. The number does not exist. So look at it. The Colts came out of last year's draft with like 12 picks, which is quite a bit. That is, even for the Colts, that's a lot of picks. They have 7 in this one. I'm going to say they wind up with more than 7. Unless, of course, they make some big trade up, which is not anticipated, but, of course, possible. But I would say it'd be more likely the Colts wind up with 8 or 9 picks, which I'll say that they'll trade back twice in this one. Especially if they trade up in the first round, they will trade back at least once or twice later in the draft to try and recoup some picks. Let's see. What was the next one? Who leads the Colts in sacks this year? I'll give it to Samson Ebukam again. He dang near had a 10-sack season for the Colts last year. And I think his biggest threat to it actually will be Dayo Odeyingbo, because that guy's development has taken an awesome trajectory throughout his young career. He's gotten better all the time, both as a run defender and pass rusher. And so Dayo, I say it's going to be Ebukam as the leading sacker, but it could easily be Dayo as well. And then at the end of the season, who wins comeback player of the year for the Colts specifically? I think the easy answer is Richardson, because as long as he plays most of the season, that's just an automatic default checkoff. Jonathan Taylor, otherwise, of course, because we've seen an example over an entire season of him being the best running back in football. Now, he has to reclaim that title. He's definitely been surpassed because he hasn't stayed healthy the last couple of years. But he has that capability. And then as a dark horse candidate, to not cheat and pick those two easy answers, I'd say Jelani Woods, because he didn't play at all last year, obviously. And we've seen that the guy has just wads of potential and could do really well in a Shane Steichen offense. Last question for the day is from @CFordFootDoc. How many of DeForest Buckner, Kwity Paye, and Dayo Adengbo would you expect back next season? I'm assuming at some point they won't keep everyone, which is in parentheses. And then, do you think the defensive line is higher on the team's wish list than a lot of fans would assume, because there's potential for a fair amount of change there? That's exactly right. So when Zach and I have talked about the Colts adding defensive linemen through the draft, it's been for a couple big reasons. One of them because the Colts will never feel they have enough pass rush. They will always stoke that fire. They want it in waves. And again, you just can't have enough defensive linemen. But also, there could be change. You do have guys coming up on free agency. Buckner, you don't know if Kwity Paye is going to get his fifth-year option picked up. He very well may not. Dayo will be a free agent the same year. So you could lose some guys. Financially, it's going to be tough. Now, we have seen the Colts be able to swing it. They just brought back like most of their free agents this offseason. Michael Pittman, Kenny Moore, Grover Stewart, Julian Blackman. Like, they brought back all the big guys they needed to. So I'm not going to put it past them to find a way to do it again, but it is not going to be cheap. Free agent edge guys of that caliber for Kwity and Dayo are getting roughly $9 to $12 million per year. Buckner is a little harder to project. He makes 21. The current contract he's on, he makes $21 million per year. We've seen like Christian Wilkins is at like $27.5 million per year, I think, with his new deal. Now, Buckner is still a great player, but he's on the wrong side of 30. So only because of age, you could see that 21 mil per year dip down to like 15 to 18 bare minimum. Or if he goes out and has a huge year, maybe he signs like a 2-year deal worth 20 to 25. We're just going to have to wait and see it, because it's going to be based on years, which at that age, they probably wouldn't sign him any longer than 2 years. If Buckner comes out and has like a big all-pro year, like we know he's capable of doing, that's going to drive up the price. And then defensive tackle, we're seeing that market, the price is rising all the time. Derek Brown just signed a huge deal. I mentioned Christian Wilkins. So a guy like Buckner, I don't think the Colts would shy away from paying him a huge contract if he earned it again, even at his age. And then, of course, guaranteed money would be a big thing as well. So really interested to see what you guys have to say about some of these as well. So, of course, any of those questions that really tipped your fancy, go ahead and put your response in there as well. Again, you guys asked us so many good questions that's going to be tomorrow's episode as well. That'll be Zach. I've got a couple things tomorrow. Kenny Moore is kind of having a charity event. The Chuck Strong Gala is tomorrow night as well, so I'll be tied up doing those things. I'll bring you some pretty cool content coming from those events tomorrow. But yeah, Zach will be answering your questions tomorrow on tomorrow's show. Don't forget, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. And then the biggie, this is what Zach has been primarily working on so much this offseason. That's the Indy Draft Guide. It is now here. It's live for $8.99 with code DRAFTMAS, DRAFTMAS. You get access to an essential piece of reading for Colts fans both before and after the draft, featuring 225 plus in-depth scouting reports, features, and much more. Click the link in the show notes to order today. And again, if you guys don't already, follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also, be sure to subscribe on YouTube wherever you listen to podcasts. We would love your ratings and reviews as well. The show is going to be over in just a second. Right when it's done, go leave us a beautiful rating and review. We would love it so much. If you're a new listener, please subscribe. You're going to get really great content, especially coming from this show leading up to and through the draft. We really put the work in, bring you guys great guests, bring you guys great analysis on these players. For my money, there's no Colts show like us. So be sure to subscribe again if you're a brand new listener. And with that, we'll see you guys tomorrow.